Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. On behalf of the UN Development Program and more specifically UNDP's Climate and Forest Program team, we're delighted to welcome you to the UNDP Pavilion for this event titled Climate Finance for Indigenous Peoples' High Integrity Forests, the Case and Urgency for Tailored Financing Mechanisms. So as many in the room, if not all, know, much of the remaining high integrity tropical forest is found in Indigenous peoples' territories. So with this session, we wanted to provide the space to have a conversation amongst Indigenous representatives, donors, civil society, on how we can accelerate climate finance solutions for high integrity Indigenous territories, with the objective to sort of tease out existing and potential concrete solutions and mechanisms so we can accelerate and maximize funding for the protection of Indigenous territories within high integrity or intact forests. Finance for high integrity forests is a key issue being addressed by the Forest for Life partnership, which UNDP is a part of, along with our partners, the Wildlife Conservation Society, Rewild, Rainforest Foundation Norway, and WRI, World Resources Institute. And we're delighted to have our partners in the room today, both on the panel and in the audience. I also want to recognize that today is Gender Day here at COP. And so we're especially grateful to have such an illustrious group of women leaders and thinkers in this space for this event. So again, given that it's Gender Day in particular, as you listen to the discussion, we also ask you to reflect on one or two actions you think can be taken to promote equitable access and benefits for Indigenous women, men, and youth when it comes to climate finance solutions for high integrity Indigenous territories. And perhaps we can come back to that as a theme in our discussion when we have the exchange between the panel and the audience in a little bit. So now I would like to first introduce my co-facilitator, Stephanie Wong, and I will pass it along to her to offer some stage setting remarks on finance for high integrity forests. Stephanie is Associate Director of Climate Finance Policy at the Wildlife Conservation Society. She has over 10 years experience working to advance climate finance and policy incentives to support forest conservation. Stephanie is focused on emerging approaches for scaling up climate finance incentives for the protection of intact forests. Thanks for being with us, Steph.
Hi, can you all hear me? Okay, removing the mask. First of all, I apologize for my voice. I seem to have lost it somewhere in these pavilions. But I'm going to provide these overviews that Kim mentioned in terms of the approaches for the finance of high integrity forests and how they relate to Indigenous peoples and local communities. So first, just to offer a clarification on what high integrity forests are. They can also be referred to as intact forests, but they're basically forests with high ecological integrity. They make up about a quarter of the world's remaining forests globally, but they have a disproportionate impact on climate regulation. There's also significant overlap between Indigenous lands and high integrity forests. So IPLC inhabit well over 35% of the world's most intact forests, and they also manage around 80% of forest biodiversity. It's also well established that in many parts of the world, forests under Indigenous control are better protected than under other land uses. So for example, a recent study found that protected Indigenous areas have the highest protective effect on forest integrity across the tropics. And WRI, who is one of our partners in the Forest for Life partnership, has been working on quantifying the emissions and removals in Indigenous lands. And if you'd like to learn more about that, there's an event tomorrow evening at the Nature Zone Pavilion where this discussion topic will be discussed. So Kim mentioned that in terms of climate finance, IPLCs in terms of overall ability to access climate finance, it's been less than 1% of official development assistance for climate adaptation and mitigation over the past 10 years. And there's also been a significant gap in climate finance for the protection of high integrity forests, especially in REDD+, because a lot of that finance is directed at the protection of forest areas that have already experienced high rates of historical deforestation. So that obviously excludes high integrity forests, as well as many indigenous territories in terms of where the finance has been targeted to date. And so I'll describe some of the emerging and climate finance modalities for the protection of high integrity forests that also where IPLC can also engage and lead in an effective way. And one of the primary modes is direct finance for indigenous territorial management. So this is envisioned as a type of performance-based finance that is using, that can be directly accessed by indigenous territorial management organizations and community-based organizations for their territorial management, with metrics that include more traditional ones, such as area-based metrics, but also effectiveness measures that could include something like the maintenance of ecological integrity, which we know will have positive outcomes for the climate. And delivering this finance is obviously essential to be able to directly fund the people running these organizations. And one new platform that will be discussed on this panel is the Shandia Vision platform that facilitates territorial financing for IPLCs in Mesoamerica, Amazonia, Africa, and Indonesia. And given the connection between ecological integrity and indigenous management of these lands, the progress and impact indicators that have identified by Shandia so far, we think could have a real impact on also the protection of ecological integrity, especially in terms of the number of hectares brought under indigenous management, the recognition of tenure rights and indigenous territories, as well as the development of sustainable financing mechanisms to keep this going over the long term. And just mention really quick, another example in DRC, the Forest for Life Partnership is in the process of developing a IPLC forest facility that to protect the remaining intact forests in DRC, both through securing land and resource rights for forest dependent peoples, as well as addressing development needs. And one of the main mechanisms for delivery of this finance is through small grants directly to indigenous peoples and local communities. And that's for the performance-based finance side of things, which is not linked to carbon markets or quantification of emission reductions for carbon markets. And in terms of that, I'll just briefly mention an emerging approach called high forest low deforestation crediting, or HFLD crediting. And so it has been developed under the ArtTrees carbon standard, and it is intended to address this major gap in carbon finance for forests, which is basically that most of it has been targeted at areas that have already experienced high rates of historical deforestation. And HFLD crediting under ArtTrees enables countries and jurisdictions and also indigenous territories to apply a conservative formula to be able to generate credits that they can then sell on the voluntary carbon market or in compliance mechanisms like CORSIA. And under ArtTrees, if you're a recognized indigenous territory, you can apply these HFLD crediting levels under a national program, but there are ways under ArtTrees where indigenous organizations can directly enable them to access credits. And organizations like COICA are developing guidance and approaches for REDD+ and carbon markets where indigenous peoples and local communities can participate as full partners rather than just as beneficiaries. And others like the Regranting Fund that Penny will discuss today are working to ensure there's high integrity in the process of REDD crediting, particularly as it applies to IPLC and access in terms of access and rights. And so finally, we'll move away from carbon markets to the need for market incentives beyond a carbon credit. One finance opportunity is quantifying the removals from these high integrity forests and the role and recognizing that the role they play in climate regulation. And so high integrity forests are largely responsible for keeping the world around half a degree cooler than otherwise would be. And these billions of tons and removals have saved the global economy in the tens of trillions of dollars, according to the IPCC. And that's basically what this half a degree is worth, but they have received less than 1% of finance directed at forest protection to date. So this approach is about developing a new climate asset class that's not a carbon credit, that puts some monetary value on these removals for the first time. And in terms of indigenous lands, which are one place where deforestation has been kept low, and these removals can potentially be quantified and valued for direct access to finance that way. And I'll just finish by saying, because of the scale and nature of this problem, it's important in all of these approaches to work collectively to find this common purpose with Indigenous peoples in the lead. Hopefully, that was good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry for the voice.
No. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Okay, now let me introduce our distinguished invited speakers on our panel. So we have Dr. Lauren Baker here, a senior policy analyst on inclusive development and environment advisor in the Office of Policy at the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, where she's been involved in the development and implementation of USAID's new climate strategy and as well as its policy on promoting the rights of Indigenous peoples. She's worked to advance Indigenous peoples' rights throughout her career. Next to Dr. Baker, we have Lolita Piawahi, who belongs to the Siocap nationality of the Ecuadorian Amazon, and I apologize for my pronunciation, one of the 11 indigenous nationalities of the Amazon region, with a total of 700 members. She has experience working directly with indigenous organizations in the field of organizational strengthening with a gender and intergenerational approach, including older adults and groups with special abilities. Since September 2020, she has been vice president of the Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities of the Ecuadorian Amazon, CONFENAI. Dr. Penny Langhammer, executive vice president of Rewild, oversees all of Rewild's programs across the world. She's responsible for developing and implementing Rewild's strategy through both regional and cross-cutting programs. Penny also leads the organization's work in several global partnerships, including the Forest for Life partnership, which I mentioned earlier, key biodiversity areas, and Red List partnerships. We have Pasang Dolma Sherpa, the executive director of the Center for Indigenous Peoples Research and Development, CIPRED. For more than a decade, she has worked with Indigenous peoples, women, and local communities for the recognition of the Indigenous people's knowledge, cultural values, and customary institutions to contribute to sustainable management of forests, ecosystems, biodiversity, and climate resilience. And finally, we have Aisatu Omaru, is a mechanical engineer and general technology teacher at LICI. She is the treasurer of the Association of Puel and Indigenous Puel Women of Chad, AFPAT, and the founder of the AFPAT Indigenous Library, one of the first Indigenous libraries in Africa. So as you can see, we have an amazing group of women here with us and really looking forward to the exchange today. And we're doing this a little bit different, just to let you know. So all of our panelists are going to be asking questions to one another. So I will first turn it over to to Lauren Baker. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Is this on? Okay. Great. It's a pleasure being here today. And I'm going to be asking a question to Lolita. So the question is, when it comes to jurisdictional REDD+ finance, what are the critical gaps you see to ensure funds are reaching Indigenous peoples and local communities, respecting rights and safeguards, and supporting the participatory processes needed? What is the type of finance needed? Yes, of course. When it comes to jurisdictional REDD+ finance, what are the critical gaps you see to ensure funds are reaching Indigenous peoples and local communities, respecting rights and safeguards, and supporting the participatory processes needed? What is the type of finance needed?
Buenos días a todos y a todas. Vengo de la Amazonía ecuatoriana en representación de la Confenía. Es un gusto estar aquí, saludarles a todos quienes están aquí presentes escuchando y saludarles también a los panelistas que están aquí en la mesa adelante. Decirles sin bosques, sin Amazonía, sin agua, no va a haber vida para todo el planeta. Entonces, es oportuno, estamos en emergencia climática, por eso debe haber una corresponsabilidad de todos nosotros quienes vivimos en este planeta Tierra. Entonces, como red más en la Amazonía, es importante mencionar algunas cosas que a nosotros nos hace falta coordinar en los territorios. Primeramente, decirles la principal barrera es la intermediación a pretexto de falta de capacidad de las organizaciones indígenas en la Amazonía. 1. 2. Nuestros gobiernos y aliados incluyen agendas propias que no son desde los territorios. Para nosotros es un tema que no están adaptados a la realidad de nuestros territorios. Por ende, hay fracasos porque no hay coordinación efectiva ni la participación efectiva de los pueblos y nacionalidades. En este caso, decirles, los fondos tienen que llegar a los territorios. Nosotros como amazónicos tenemos el plan de implementación que hemos hecho a través de apoyo de nuestros compañeros con los criterios. Hemos trabajado en la Amazonía, ya lo tenemos, solo necesitamos buscar financiamiento. Tenemos planes de vida de los territorios, ya no hay por qué hacer consultorías grandes, pagar a los expertos en estos temas. Muchas veces los fondos que vienen al Estado, a los aliados, no llega efectivamente a los territorios. Entonces, nosotros decimos ahora desde los territorios que nos escuchen, que nos respeten a los verdaderos cuidadores del bosque. Necesitamos una compensación justa porque realmente ahorita estamos en una crisis climática que nos afecta a todos. Creo que nosotros somos los únicos milenarios cuidadores del bosque. Siempre lo vamos a cuidar. Pero ante esta situación, amenazas de las empresas extractivistas, mineras, petroleras, sentimos afectados porque nuestros bosques, nuestros ríos están contaminados. Y también decirles también, es importante escuchar las voces de las mujeres. Nosotros hay que aplicar ya en los territorios, ya con proyectos de iniciativas locales, sin dañar nuestros bosques. Para ello necesitamos un precio justo con lo que nosotros hacemos. Queremos emprendimientos sostenibles, no solamente que funcione ese momento cuando hay plata. Para ello están las mujeres jóvenes y nuestros compañeros y compañeras para hacer el realce. Y asimismo decirles que es importante también mencionar que la participación efectiva de los territorios tienen que ser mecanismos efectivas, porque nosotros trabajamos en la toma de decisiones en conjunto para respetando obviamente nuestro saber ancestral, nuestra cultura, nuestro idioma. Eso hay que fortalecer. Por ende, invitado a todos los que escuchan que nos respeten y queremos vivir dignamente con nuestra selva en armonía, con nuestros espíritus, porque son quienes nos han enseñado a vivir cuidando estos bosques. Sabemos cómo cuidar. Y decirles también, hemos iniciado con Red Más, hemos iniciado, digo, porque estamos recién incorporando, estamos coordinando, estamos coordinando actividades con la finalidad de conservar, reforestar, también trabajar en temas de bioeconomía, en el fortalecimiento de la gobernanza, en la delimitación de los territorios ancestrales, porque son parte de nosotros. Y hemos dicho, trabajar en el componente de educación. Muchas veces los donantes no ven el tema de educación ni de salud por llevar agendas ajenas al territorio. Entonces, decirles que tiene que palpar qué es lo que nosotros necesitamos. Nosotros decir cómo queremos vivir, qué es lo que necesitamos. Eso nos falta a todos entender y los aliados socios estratégicos no vean como ajenos, no vean como beneficiarios. Nosotros queremos ser parte de ello, de ese proceso. Entonces es importante hacer enlaces oportunamente con ustedes. Creo que es una corresponsabilidad para toda la sociedad. No veamos que solamente nosotros, los pueblos indígenas, defendamos estos derechos humanos y defensa de los territorios, sino que es de todos, tanto las empresas grandes que contaminan, también tienen que ser corresponsables a eso, no solamente ellos crear grandes empresas y seguir expandiendo, no. Ahora ha existido también a nuestros territorios inconsultamente, ya están entrando a explotar petróleo, minería. Entonces eso les invito a todos que no nos explotemos, porque de ello vamos a vivir. Sin agua no va a poder vivir la sociedad. Nosotros los seres humanos vamos a morir. Entonces, invitarles que necesitamos vivir con vida digna como seres humanos, siempre respetando esos valores que tenemos en los territorios.
Thank you so much, Lolita. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective. I think you helped illustrate very clearly the challenges, the needs. And I think now you have a question to pose to our colleague Penny here on perhaps one of the potential solution areas. Yes, I'll let you go ahead, please.
Penny, entiendo que su organización está haciendo, ¿no es cierto?, lanzando un nuevo mecanismo financiero. ¿Podrá compartir más detalles sobre esto? ¿Cómo podría llenar algunos de estos vacíos críticos en el financiamiento jurisdiccional de Red Más, en particular con respecto a los pueblos indígenas, que es muy importante la participación de nosotros?
Thank you, Lolita. Thanks very much for inviting me to be part of the panel. Yes, so this really stems from this regranting fund that I'm going to talk to you about, a series of consultations that were closer. Yeah, it's okay. Okay, thank you. Undertaken or convened by the Climate and Land Use Alliance, which Rewild and others on this panel participated in over the past year, really looking at or discussing gaps in readiness for jurisdictional RED. And following from that process, which I have to hold it like this. Okay, sorry. Thank you. Some of the gaps that were highlighted, which Lolita mentioned, but I'll just reiterate here, are a source of nimble readiness funds, a trusted mechanism for IPLCs for increasing capacity, and really something that can be efficient, quick, fill gaps in existing mechanisms that can fund high integrity examples. And by high integrity here, I mean, we're really focused on the process of ensuring that the process has high social and environmental integrity as part of these jurisdictional RED programs. So following from these consultations, we held a number of meetings over the summer, including with IPLCs, including during the Oslo Tropical Forest forum and following that, but also with experts on jurisdictional red to compare what tools and programs were out there, what the needs are, so that we could design something that would be really filling these critical gaps. So we're in the process of launching this re-granting fund for integrity and forest carbon markets. We'll come up with a more eloquent name at some point, with seed funding from the Climate and Land Use Alliance and the Hewlett Foundation. And the purpose of this is to ensure that emissions reductions programs can meet the high integrity standards, both for social and environmental safeguards. It will provide targeted support for technical assistance, advice, and stakeholder engagement to help jurisdictions and IPLCs to achieve these high integrity process. We're not, the purpose of the fund isn't to generate credits. It's really to help ensure that the process that jurisdictions are undertaking to develop credits can achieve the high integrity standards. It will strengthen critical gaps in government capacity to be able to meet these standards, and create what we're calling like a blind trust to ensure that we can avoid the pitfalls that we've seen in project level carbon. So donors to the fund will have a defined and limited role in the decision making. It will be a multi-donor fund that will be consolidating philanthropic sources of funding, private sector, potentially public sector funding, and really provide this nimble vehicle that can channel finance to IPLCs, to NGOs, to jurisdictional governments, potentially, to ensure that these processes, that there's adequate stakeholder consultation, fair benefit sharing. There could be technical assistance on things like safeguard verification, are some of the things that we can envision this fund supporting. It will be overseen by an advisory council that will consist of IPLC representatives along with technical experts. So this is addressing another one of the gaps highlighted by Lolita. It will create a table where Indigenous peoples can come to the table with technical experts and help design and create a fund that will respond to their needs. It will have really an emphasis on achieving tangible on the ground changes for long-term transformations in forest governance, and really will be emphasizing the communication of results. I think this is something that this fund can really add value, in addition to funding these emblematic examples of processes that are done well, but actually to communicate these results more widely so that they can be replicated in other geographies. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Penny. And I'll let you, yep.
Thank you.
I'll let you
Sure.
pose a question to your fellow panelists there.
Sure. So Pasang, in your experience, how can Indigenous people's role and contribution be fully recognized? And what elements of the financial architecture for results-based finance, including RED+, need to be addressed for funding to flow? And can you draw from your example in Nepal?
Thank you, Penny. Tasdile Namaskar. Good morning, everyone. My pleasure. And thank you, UNDP, for inviting in this distinguished, among distinguished panelists and Gender Day. Happy Gender Day. And my great pleasure to be with all my very strong sisters here in this panel. And thank you, UNDP, for your invitation and also organizing this very important event, during the important event on the Gender Day. Yeah, when I reflect back my own experience, it's almost more than 15 years already in the area of working on the climate change, and especially in relation to Indigenous peoples and RED+. That's how actually I engage on this whole process. As you have already shared early in the beginning, that how Indigenous people around the world contributed for the safeguarding the biodiversity, more than 80% by 6.2 Indigenous people around the world, despite being forefront to the impacts of climate change. This is already one of the indication that what Indigenous people can do it, and also another part is our own ground level experience, not only with the data, but the ground level experience on the ground with the indigenous peoples and local communities already shows the important crucial role of our knowledge system, our cultural, our spiritual connection to the resources. That is actually the foundation for intact of the forest. Because if something happened with the forest, that happened to your own life. And just giving the examples from from in Nepal, also from Kirat communities, even from in Uttara, in Tharu communities, even in the current communities in Thailand, no. More the population of indigenous people, that means more forest, because once your child is born, the navel is been is strong, put in the in the bamboos and tied in the trees. That means that the trees symbolically represent your child. So this is just one of the examples of among many, So when you have a more population of indigenous people, that means more trees, and more trees means more biodiversity and maintenance of the ecosystem. And that connection has hardly been reflected in our policy discourse on the climate change. The indigenous people have been, somehow been represented like maybe causes of drivers of deforestation, causes of the, for ecosystem because of the being in the forest and like that. So in a most forest regime like conservation, like a national park, the issues has been like the rights of indigenous people been seen like a threat. But the rights of indigenous peoples is not the threat, but the solution. Because if you have the rights of indigenous people, that means the right of protecting your knowledge system, the cultural values and your way of life that has contributed for intact of the forest. And this is the time that we need to understand that connection. And if we have the rights of a customer institution, if we have recognition of customer institution, that means we also recognize the self-governance system of indigenous people. And self-governance system of indigenous people is a whole bunch of knowledge, our cultural values, and our way of life. That is the basis for climate change resilience. So, but the challenges for indigenous peoples is in the present finance architect is the so complicated, not only complicated process, but there's no little space for indigenous people. When I had a assessment of the climate finance recently, and I was also very pretty occupied in the party engaged right from the beginning since 2008 on the climate RED plus architect. Like now we have a benefit sharing mechanism for most of the countries with the FCPF. The problem with the benefit sharing mechanism at the moment is all this process architect has more given to the flow of the climate finance given to the recognized entity. But for customer institution is not legal recognized, is still 8, no? So that already shows that flow of private financing and benefit sharing, there's no direct access to the indigenous people. This is a really frustrating and demotivating, despite being impacts of the climate change. So I would like to, raise our concerns of indigenous people. You need to legalize our customer institution, and then only we can have a governance system, and then only we can protect our knowledge and practices, and that to be continued by future generation. No, in the absence of legal recognition, it is just only the false illusion. That is what my own personal experience. Yeah, maybe I can get back later more.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Pasang. I think, you illustrated more of the challenges, particularly with this specific example of the cultural institutions and benefit sharing. I think that's very interesting. It'd be interesting to hear if potential solutions for that particular challenge and the critical importance of traditional knowledge and recognizing and integrating that. So thank you so much. So I'll let you pose a question to you.
Yeah, I'm really happy to ask my question to my sister Aisatu. We know indigenous peoples have been working hard to create their own financial mechanism to receive direct funding. What is the Sandia's added value in mobilizing climate finance to benefit indigenous people? Here you go.
Bonjour tout le monde, bonjour mes sœurs et merci pour la question à ma sœur adorée Pasang. Alors, comme vous savez tous, les mécanismes actuels sont tellement complexes. Alors, les mécanismes qui existent actuellement en ce qui concerne les finances des peuples autochtones sont structurés comme suit. C'est-à-dire, il y a une pyramide inversée. Dans cette pyramide-là, nous allons retrouver d'abord les donateurs, les fonds publics. Et là, en dessous, nous allons trouver maintenant les fondations, les gouvernements nationaux et les multilatéraux. Viennent maintenant la partie des grandes organisations et les institutions des Nations Unies. En plus de ça, nous allons trouver encore les organisations du Nord, les pays du Nord, et sous ça, nous aurons les petites organisations. Et il y a encore d'autres intermédiaires non énumérés en dessous avant que ça n'arrive au peuple autochtone. Alors, qu'est-ce que nous, en tant que bénéficiaires directs, nous obtenons? Nous n'aurons que 7% des fonds dédiés au peuple autochtone. C'est-à-dire les 93% vont seulement dans les intermédiaires. Ça veut dire qu'on est en train de créer 93 problèmes dans le monde parce que tout cet argent va dans les poches des riches qui vont acheter encore des véhicules, qui vont effectuer des voyages pour nous créer encore plus de gaz à effet de serre. Alors, qu'est-ce que les peuples autochtones ont décidé? Nous avons décidé de créer ensemble Chandia. Qu'est-ce que Chandia même? Chandia est une plateforme créée par les peuples autochtones pour garantir et faciliter l'accès direct aux fonds qui visent à réaliser des actions qui tendent à stopper les effets des changements climatiques, à protéger la biodiversité par les organisations même de peuples autochtones et communautés locales. Chandia permet de connecter, renforcer les mécanismes et les capacités des organisations qui sont aux Nations Amériques, qui sont en Indonésie, qui sont dans les deux principaux bassins planétaires, à savoir le bassin de l'Amazonie et le bassin du Congo. Alors, elle mène aussi des négociations directes avec les donateurs sur la tenue foncière, et sur et forestière des peuples autochtones. Elle protège la dégradation des sols, la biodiversité, à travers les organisations de peuples autochtones. Alors, elle renforce aussi les économies et respecte les priorités fixées par les organisations de la société civile même. Elle a une vision. Sa vision est d'abord, Chandia est une plateforme mondiale qui qui facilite les finances territoriaux pour les peuples autochtones et les communautés locales. Elle assure aussi la protection de la terre-mère, évidemment, en soutenant la reconnaissance des droits fonciers et forestiers, en renforçant la gestion territoriale, en promouvant les économies communautaires et en faisant avancer la lutte contre le changement climatique. Elle a aussi une mission. Sa mission est de garantir la durabilité et la rapidité aux finances directes pour les actions, évidemment, qui luttent contre le changement climatique, la dégradation du sol, la biodiversité, par les organisations de peuples autochtones même, évidemment. Ces actions portent directement sur le droit et l'autonomisation de ces communautés-là. Elle a quelques principes, elle a 10 principes en tout. Et dans les 10 principes, nous avons le premier principe qui est de la participation pleine et effective des peuples autochtones à la structure de gouvernance des mécanismes avec des partenaires équitablement. Le deuxième est assurer la mise en œuvre du CLIP, qui est le consentement libre, dans cette initiative qui est déjà prévue. Et son troisième principe est la participation et l'inclusion pleine et effective des femmes et des jeunes dans la planification et dans l'évaluation des activités qui seront réalisées par ces finances directes. Elle a des innovations locales qui sont, il y a l'identification, le renforcement et la reproduction des activités, des initiatives locales qui sont réussies dans des différentes localités qu'œuvre Chandia et respectent les systèmes et savoirs traditionnels principaux. Il y a aussi la transparence sur l'organisation et l'utilisation de ces fonds-là. Il y a aussi le renforcement des capacités dès le départ, dès le début, c'est-à-dire avant même d'implanter Chandia, il va y avoir des formations, des renforcements des capacités dans chaque région avec qui est spécifique à chaque région. Par exemple, je prends dans le bassin de Congo, nous sommes actuellement en train de vouloir installer et renforcer les capacités des membres du REPALEAC sur comment utiliser même Chandia. Il y a aussi les systèmes d'évaluation sur la base des communautés locales et peuples autochtones. Nous avons l'efficience et l'efficacité. Les mécanismes doivent être mesurés, doivent être en mesure de garantir la responsabilité. C'est-à-dire les mécanismes qui sont là peuvent garantir la responsabilité des organisations qui vont mettre en œuvre ces finances-là, et aussi avec une transparence et des mécanismes administratifs simples et flexibles selon les spécificités de chaque région et de chaque partenaire de mise en œuvre. C'est aussi pour garantir la pérennité de la nature et de l'écosystème, puisque nous savons tous, les peuples autochtones, c'est eux qui sont les protecteurs, les premiers protecteurs de l'environnement et qui détiennent des savoirs et connaissances traditionnelles en mesure de protéger notre planète pendant qu'elle est en agonie. Et le dernier principe, évidemment, est l'accès à l'information. C'est créer un système public d'information sur la situation de l'écosystème, sur la situation des écosystèmes et des statuts foncières à travers les différentes parties. Alors, elle doit être implantée dans des différentes zones d'action. Nous avons parlé tout à l'heure des Mésoamériques, de l'Amérique latine, de l'Indonésie, et ainsi de suite. Mais il y a des organisations, des réseaux spécifiques dans ces provinces-là. Nous avons le réseau AMAN, nous avons l'AMPB, nous avons l'APIB, nous avons COICA, et en Afrique centrale, évidemment, chez moi, nous avons REPALEAC. Et toutes ces organisations-là sont membres de l'Alliance globale, qui est une organisation internationale que vous connaissez tous. Alors, voilà en quelque sorte, qu'est-ce que c'est Chandia? Mais nous sommes là pour répondre aussi aux questions. Mais avant de remettre évidemment le micro, je suis assez excitée de poser une question à ma sœur Lorraine. Alors, vous savez, l'engagement des donateurs pour les peuples autochtones et la tenue foncière et forestière à la COP26 était impressionnante, évidemment. Mais quels sont les progrès accomplis jusqu'à présent dans la réalisation de cet engagement? Et comment les donateurs peuvent-ils s'assurer que les fonds parviennent aux communautés locales et ceux qui vivent autour des différents écosystèmes? Merci beaucoup. Vous n'avez pas compris la question, vous voulez que je répète? D'accord. Alors, l'engagement des donateurs pour les peuples autochtones sur la tenue foncière et forestière à la COP26 était impressionnant, évidemment. Mais quels sont les progrès accomplis jusqu'à présent dans la réalisation de cet engagement? Et comment les donateurs peuvent-ils s'assurer que le fonds parvienne aux communautés qui vivent autour des différents écosystèmes? Merci.
Great, thank you for your question. And okay, I'll
speak about donor commitments today, but of course, all of those are based on and in service of the commitments and the great work that Indigenous peoples and local communities around the world have done to protect these intact forests. You know, I think, of course, the evidence is there, as we heard, but intuitively and through the kind of passionate commitment, of course, we've you know, the effectiveness, the commitment of Indigenous peoples and local communities as guardians of the forest, and certainly, you know, recognize as well the many times your communities have put their lives on the line, you know, in your own territories, lands and territories, to protect your rights, to protect your livelihoods, to protect your culture, and to protect the forest. So thank you. That's the beginning. In terms of the commitment of donors, even closer, okay? Yeah, okay. In terms of donors, there is certainly recognition of these contributions, and as a result, last year at COP26, there was a group of 23 bilateral and philanthropic donors that came together to announce the pledge of $1.7 billion in favor of Indigenous peoples and local communities for forest tenure. Now, this pledge is one that pulls together a mix of existing commitments, existing efforts for a number of the different donors on supporting Indigenous peoples' rights and formalization of tenure, capacity strengthening, and so on. And a mix of new commitments as well, of course. And it's over this 5-year period, 2021 to 2025. The first year results were just captured in a report that was released here at COP27. So please do consider checking that out. It has a breakdown of different funds by region, by type. And there's certainly more that should be done for direct financing, and we know that. But there's also really notable examples of how partnerships have been strengthened, have been really in line with Indigenous people's visions and priorities. And so you can see some of these examples. For USAID, we highlighted, for example, the Amazon Indigenous Rights and Resources program, working with a number of different Indigenous federations, with COICA, with OPIAC, with different federations in the Amazon on protecting lands and territories through a mix of different approaches, capacity strengthening, the actual kind of legal titling mechanisms, getting those in, and those efforts are helpful. There's so many other great examples in that report from the other bilateral donors, from UK, who led the effort, Ford Foundation, who was the vice chair of the Forest Tenure Funders Group. So there are some notable efforts, and of course, part of the purpose of this pledge is to continue to renew commitment, to expand direct financing, and to learn from each other on how to do that. Now, some of the ways that that can be done have been brought up today in really powerful ways. Regranting mechanisms, having trusted intermediary organizations, including those led by Indigenous peoples, they're critical. The reality is, at least for big donors, big bilateral donors like USAID, the direct funding piece is admittedly difficult, and it's difficult for you to deal with us. I mean, probably more difficult for you to deal with us than vice versa. There's certainly efforts to be able to make our processes not as complicated. For example, different ways of having new partnerships, initiatives, co-creation, you know, certainly listening tours. There's a bunch of different things that we're doing in order to make us, our processes, more accessible to you all, and there's steps that are taking, we think, advances on those regards. In fact, USAID as an agency, you know, writ large, has some pretty notable localization targets, including a 25% target for
direct funds to local organizations by 2025 and a 50% target by the end of the decade for local leadership. So things like I was just mentioning,
These more meaningful engagements, co-creation at the beginning of the design process, implementation, hand in hand, et cetera.
And that's just a bilateral donor like us, but there's so many more opportunities as well through other sorts of funding arrangements. And I really do hope that through this
Indigenous peoples and local communities forest tenure pledge, we will be able to increase those partnerships in an effective manner. So maybe I'll stop there, but I'm open for other questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay. Thank you so much, Aisatu. I didn't have a chance to thank you for your intervention. The Shandia platform is such an interesting model, and I hope we can discuss that more in our discussion with the audience as well. And thank you, Lauren. Again, very, solution oriented, how we can address the challenges. I think this is really useful for our discussion. So thank you again to all the panelists for your initial round. I just wanted, before we bring in the audience to the discussion, I wanted to see if any of you have follow-up points, anything else that was triggered that you heard from another fellow panelist that you'd like to have some follow-up questions, and then we'll open it to the audience. Yeah, okay. I think Lolita. No.
Merci beaucoup, Laurence. Merci, vraiment, c'est très important ce que vous dites. Alors, moi, je voudrais que nos partenaires, nos donateurs, on ne parle pas de bénéficiaires et de bailleurs, mais on parle plutôt des partenaires. Parce que nous ne voulons plus être des donateurs, des receveurs, des bénéficiaires. Nous voulons être des partenaires de mise en œuvre parce que là, nous, on est en train de guérir la plaie qui a été causée par ces donateurs-là. Alors, nous sommes des partenaires désormais, nous ne sommes plus des bénéficiaires. Alors, pour ce, nous exhortons à ne pas mettre plus la pression sur les ateliers. Les frais que vous amenez, par exemple, si vous amenez 5 personnes en Afrique, imaginez les billets, aller-retour, la prise en charge, les hôtels, le déplacement, tout ça. C'est du carbone en plus dans l'air. C'est des gaz à effet de serre de plus dans l'air. Pourquoi ne pas donner ces fonds-là directement à une organisation? Si vous faites ça, 4-5 ateliers par année, choisissez 4-5 organisations de base. Je dis bien organisations de base, communautaires, avec des actions sur le terrain concrètes, mesurables, évaluables, avec impact direct sur la planète. Donnez ça, même si c'est 1 million de francs CFA. Les réalisations qui vont être faites avec cet argent que vous donnez, c'est encore, ça a plus d'impact sur les communautés locales qui vivent à la base que de nous donner des ateliers de formation. 26 ans, 27 ans, ça fait quoi? De 92 jusqu'à nos jours. Combien des ateliers de renforcement de capacité ont été faits? Quelle est l'action concrète sur le terrain? C'est ça ce que nous voulons maintenant. C'est une contribution. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Thank you. I just would like to highlight one point that I missed to incorporate in my earlier intervention, in my earlier notes. As you are already aware that very dire need of filling the gap, no? The gap is there because still the role and contribution of indigenous people is still yet to be recognized, right, from the national relevant authorities. No, so one of the problem that what CPED we have been putting our own effort, how we have a evidence-based approach for the policy advocacy. No, because policy advocacy is readily needed, but one of the gap is there is no enough information. No, because in the historical indigenous people, our stories, our values are more orally, no. But in this whole, new form of this, discussion, we need kind of information, data, stories to be documented and make it as a basis for our policy advocacy. And as you are already aware that the recent report, the sixth assessment report of the IPCC already highlighted the importance of the indigenous knowledge. But so far in the history, the research and all this part has been done only from the kind of bigger INGO or bigger like a consultant like that, no? But hardly have a space for indigenous people, and indigenous knowledge as a science has been hardly been reflected in this discourse. So I would like to really highlight that although IPCC had started, because I'm one of the steering committee of the IPCC and along working with the ECOMOS and UNESCO, but that effort has not been still effective because still there's a domination from bigger scientists, so-called scientists, and indigenous knowledge as a science has hardly been reflected. So this is the time I would like to urge all our partners, donors, and also other relevant agencies that now this is the time that we need to have a real voice from the real people, no, and the ground level voice from the ground level experience, no, and given the opportunity for indigenous peoples for speaking their own voice, not being not being reduplicated, not being like a miscommunicated, and then one will have a final solution to climate crisis. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Pasang. Lolita, you had some more points, right?
Decirles, como somos parte de este proceso, añadiendo a las compañeras, decirles que en los procesos de participación, en las reuniones de negociación, tanto el Estado y la sociedad civil, por ejemplo, como pueblos indígenas, debemos estar ahí conjuntamente con los donantes, porque nosotros somos los que vamos a ver cuáles son las que vamos a llegar con los territorios, porque muchas veces el Estado está en la toma de decisiones y en la negociación y nosotros no sabemos y no hay esa participación. Invitarles a todos, más que todo a los organizadores de COP, que haya esa participación efectiva, el involucramiento en estas temáticas, por no solamente dar vocería solo debajo, sino que estar en esos espacios. Como Confenie, nosotros ya tenemos las iniciativas Cuencas Sagradas, es trabajar conjuntamente en los territorios, ya tenemos identificados en qué temas, en qué componentes trabajamos. Una de ellas es la conservación, restauración, energías limpias, bioeconomía, trabajar con mujeres, jóvenes y también trabajar bastante en el tema de delimitación territorial de nuestros territorios que están ahora concesionadas. Queremos recuperar, identificar y seguir cuidando esos bosques. Nosotros como cuidadores de los bosques estamos claros, hemos cuidado milenariamente sin recursos, sin nada, pero ese potencial tiene que ser reconocida y compensada justamente para que nuestros hijos e hijas puedan ir a estudiar en diferentes técnicas, contar con profesionales, porque realmente en las nacionalidades no han exigido que necesitamos economías alternativas para poder hacer estudiar en educación, salud, en diferentes temas, y así nosotros también poder tener a los chicos jóvenes para que vayan involucrando, porque muchas de veces es esa traba. Dicen que nosotros no tenemos esa capacidad administrativa. La Confenie hoy está haciendo ya la unidad ejecutora para poder administrar directamente, captar fondos para nuestros compañeros. Va a ser una unidad diferente, equipo técnico, la parte administrativa, y por ello tenemos el PDI de la Confenie que tiene insertado con este programa de Cuencas Sagradas y también el plan bioregional que es parte de ello, y todo está articulado con los planes de vida de todos los compañeros que estamos en los territorios. Por eso es importante, estoy dando vocerías para decir qué vamos a apoyar. Nosotros también somos socios, entonces hay que consultas efectivas, la participación efectiva y también conocer los procesos y los mecanismos. Y los mecanismos tienen que ser fáciles, no muchas trabas, no mucha burocracia. El Estado también queremos una minga efectiva, no solamente desde arriba para abajo, eso es imposible. Entonces invito una vez más consideren a los pueblos y nacionalidades parte de ese proceso y la toma de decisiones. Entonces, muchas gracias.
Gracias.
Thank you so much, Lolita. And Lauren, I think, has some responses, and then we'll open it up to the audience.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to mention as well, I know we just had a chance to touch on the pledge here today, but I did want to note that at the US Center at 3 p.m. on Wednesday, we have a specific additional full session dedicated to discussing the pledge. It's called Building a Multi-Stakeholder Mechanism with Indigenous Peoples to Implement the Forest Tenure Pledge. And we'll have speakers from Apeliac, from Global Alliance for Territorial Communities and others, including some examples of ways that we're working in DRC at USAID with directly with Indigenous peoples in ways that I think you'll find really enlightening. So do encourage you to consider coming then. One of the great things that I have had the privilege of working on at USAID is our policy on promoting the rights of Indigenous peoples. And you can tell from the title itself, it is about promoting the rights. That is our orientation. And one of our principles is partnership. This is a core piece of what we're trying to do. We have senior Indigenous peoples advisors at USAID, Indigenous advisors, both in DC and in some missions. It's critical. It's critical to shift the relationship. The point about not being beneficiaries, being, focus on partnership is core. It's been a guiding principle for us for years now, and we really appreciate that orientation. Part of the way that we're actualizing that is through our Indigenous Peoples Alliance on Rights and Development, which is a partnership with the FSC Indigenous Foundation. And so that's another example where we're trying to work these partnerships so that we can find trusted intermediaries with Indigenous people-led intermediaries, organizations to help facilitate these partnerships. So wanted to feature that. I will say, understandably, these mechanisms will be complicated. They'll continue to be complicated. For USAID, we are bilateral, and therefore our funds are from US taxpayers. There's a degree of demands for the kind of reporting and all of that, and it can be a lot, and there's some wiggle room that we have to adjust, and then some things that will just continue to be a heavy lift, as we say. So, just kind of recognizing those balances, but certainly the will is there, and the creativity that we can seek together for opportunities for those direct funding, as well as through trusted intermediaries, as well as through regranting, will be really key, I think, as we take these efforts forward. Thank you.
Oh, great, sure. Penny, yes?
Just in case I don't get a question about this, I just wanted to mention that the regranting fund that Rewild is establishing will be online by the end of the year or early next year. It will be able to provide direct funding to IPLC groups as well as NGOs. And yeah, it's really what you were saying, Lolita, about ensuring effective participation of IPLCs in these processes are the core of what this is trying to achieve. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all again. I'm going to now give our audience a chance to interact with our amazing panel now. So I'll pass it along to Stephanie to co-facilitate.
Hi. Is there anyone who has a question in this room? And I would just suggest, I've been told that you need to speak right into the mic and not like move your heads so that the translators on Zoom can hear you. But do we have any questions? Jason?
Thank you for this panel, and I'm sorry I missed the first part of it. But I heard the mentions about the IPCC work, and I just wanted to make the comment, the IPCC has a whole body of science built around integrated assessment models that are designed to look ahead at what's coming. If the negotiations succeed in keeping us on track to 1.5, if they succeed, there are going to be increasing pressures on Indigenous territories, increasing pressures from the expansion of urbanization, from the expansion of the need for more food production, from the expansion of the need for bioenergy, fuel production, And all of these things are going to put additional pressures on Indigenous territories as an unintended consequence of the success in mitigating climate change and keeping the earth cooler. So it's an urgent priority to make sure that Indigenous territories have the rights they need to secure those territories, as you've been talking about, that they have the resources they need to protect and patrol, and also the understanding to be able to say, maybe these are opportunities for us, maybe there are things we don't want to participate in, but they need the capacity to be able to make that decision for themselves. Otherwise, these things will be forced upon them. So to protect the integrity of these territories and the cultures that are associated with them, it's got to happen now. I mean, this is exceptionally urgent, and I think, you know, it's taken a long time already. So if we can prioritize that issue, and it has to do with the fact that we want these other things to succeed, but we don't want Indigenous people to be affected as in a negative way as a consequence of that. So that's more of a comment than a question, but thank you.
Okay, would anyone, oh, okay. Well, he said it's more of a comment, but are there any reactions at the moment, or?
Yeah, I just would like to thank you for our brother on the role and you know, the emphasis of the IPCC. That is what the Indigenous people are craving for. No, no more exploitation, no more eviction, no more torture, no more you know, suffering in the name of the in whole this arcing so-called conservation or national park, in the name of climate change, no, or in the name of development, no, in the name of this modern advancement. So as we already highlighted that earlier, that you know, how Indigenous people's way of life, protecting that way of life it means we are already protecting the nature-based principle that has been highlighted in the climate change negotiation. We do not need to go through the nature-based solution. Just only accept the Indigenous people way of life. That is already nature-based solution. So that is what we are craving for. And I'm glad to hear from the IPCC focus also, because I have been also, you know, requesting IPCC colleagues and also in this whole efforts of the IPCC, know how we can bring the Indigenous experts and you know, the scientists to come in the same equal footing as a scientist that has been followed for climate change, and then we'll have a holistic kind of solution to climate change crisis to deal with. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Pasang. Yes.
Muchísimas gracias. Soy Lola Cabral, una mujer maya Ekchi de una comunidad rural en Guatemala. Nosotros hemos escuchado. Hola, ahí está bien. Muy bien, entonces soy Lola Cabral, mujer maya Ekchi de una comunidad rural en Guatemala. Nosotras las mujeres, bueno, primero quiero felicitar también a las mujeres panelistas, muy buenas presentaciones. Nosotras las mujeres en nuestros territorios, en nuestras comunidades, estamos en la primera línea de sufrir las consecuencias de la crisis del cambio climático. Aunado a esto, nuestros hijos y nuestras hijas, la juventud, también está en el camino de sufrir mucho peor la crisis que está dejando cambio climático. Y una de las cosas que nosotros estamos pidiendo aquí es que desde el Acuerdo de París nacieron tantos compromisos y responsabilidades de estados en asumir la responsabilidad de poder dar una estrategia para poder reducir las emisiones de los impactos de cambio climático. Razón por la que nosotros como pueblos indígenas hemos luchado para poder fortalecer el trabajo de los pueblos indígenas a través de la plataforma de comunidades locales y pueblos indígenas. En este sentido, los pueblos indígenas como caucus indígenas de las 7 regiones del mundo hemos estado trabajando y promoviendo que se fortalezca, que se cumplan estos compromisos. Entonces, aquí lo que están pidiendo las hermanas es que nosotros debemos de ser socios estratégicos de los donantes y de los estados para vincular nuestros conocimientos y prácticas ancestrales a lo científico, porque solo así podemos salvar el mundo, porque nosotros hemos hablado sin equidad y justicia entre pueblos indígenas, los gobiernos y los donantes, no podemos hablar de una solución a los territorios y a los bosques. Quienes conservamos nuestros bosques somos nosotros, los pueblos indígenas, y por nuestros conocimientos y prácticas, por nuestras formas propias de vivir con la madre naturaleza, por las formas propias y prácticas tradicionales que hemos realizado en nuestras comunidades. Por eso mismo estamos acá, de decirle a los donantes que queremos ser socios, que reconozcan nuestros conocimientos y prácticas, las capacidades desde la gestión, desde la práctica, desde la administración e implementación de acciones. Nosotros trabajamos con juventud, tenemos acciones, prácticas y podemos mencionar los porcentajes de viabilidad que estamos realizando con la juventud para tener la capacidad desarrollada y poder enfrentar la crisis climática en todos sentidos, sin expandir el horizonte de la agricultura, sin expandir la tala de árboles en nuestros bosques, sino que hacemos a través de una educación que les permite herramientas para salir adelante de esta crisis. Así que invito a todas y todos para poder a tomar esos modelos importantes, porque para nosotros, sin nosotros, no hay solución. Gracias.
Thank you so much. Do we have any reactions from the panel before? Oh, okay. Oh, okay, I can take one more question maybe from the audience, and then we'll see if we have reactions. Oh, okay.
Bonjour, bonjour toutes les femmes, bonjour tout le monde. Juste un petit témoignage pour vous dire l'importance des connaissances des peuples autochtones et leur connaissance de la nature et leur importance dans toutes les solutions qu'on va élaborer. Donc moi, je suis ici de la communauté pastorale du Burkina Faso. Bon, je ne sais pas si tout le monde connaît, mais quand on parle du Sahel, le Sahel aujourd'hui où il y a tous les viseurs, je viens de là. Donc moi, ma communauté est restée dans cette terre, sur cette terre. Quand il y a eu la crise sécuritaire et que tout le monde a fui l'insécurité, nos communautés autochtones, elles ont préféré rester sur place sur leur terre parce qu'elles ne peuvent pas vivre en ville, elles ne connaissent pas la ville. Et elles sont restées là, et privées de tout service de base, santé, éducation et tout ça, mais elles ont réussi à survivre avec la nature, dans la nature, grâce à la nature. Elles vivent des produits de la nature, de la cueillette. Elles sont revenues à la cueillette. Nous sommes au XXIe siècle. Elles ont dû recourir à la cueillette pour survivre et utiliser les plantes pour se soigner. Et donc, comme il y avait la pression sur ces plantes-là, les plantes médicinales, elles ont été obligées par moment de reproduire ces plantes-là, replanter ces plantes ou greffer parfois pour pouvoir avoir des médicaments un peu moins amers pour les bébés, par exemple, etc., etc. Donc, pendant ce temps-là, elles se battent comme elles peuvent dans ces zones-là pour restaurer la nature, pour sauvegarder la nature. Mais le fait qu'elles soient isolées par l'insécurité, le gouvernement continue à capter les aides. Et ces aides-là restent dans ce circuit traditionnel. Et ça n'arrive pas à ces populations-là. Donc, je lance un cri de cœur ici, sur cette tribune-là, et que vous relayez nos voix. J'espère que la paix va revenir un jour. Il faudra faire focus sur ces populations-là et aller les encourager, les aider à continuer à préserver tout ça et à transmettre ces connaissances traditionnelles qui étaient presque perdues. Voilà. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much. Just give the panel a chance to react to the previous two questions, if we have anything, or if not, we'll take another, maybe one more question from the audience, and then wrap up. If there are none in the room, do we have questions online? No. Okay, if someone online wants to read out one of the questions, no. We'll see. No? Okay. Okay. Any final questions from the audience in the room or comments? Okay. Great. And any final remarks from any of our panelists before we wrap up? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this panel has been really excellent for capturing the essence of the important role and contribution that Indigenous people could do, and also this panel has been really important for sensitizing why Indigenous peoples, why the Indigenous people on the ground, what is their role and contribution, and why it is important to recognize our customary institution and self-governance system, and which are the bottom and the basis for protection of our knowledge and and the cultural values that contributed for ecosystem and climate change resilience. And finally, also I would like to highlight that why Indigenous peoples experts to be in the forefront for doing evidence-based research to fill the gap, especially working with the different agencies, including government. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Alors, moi, je suis très contente de participer à ces assises-là. Ça a été vraiment un grand plaisir. Et j'aimerais bien demander encore et encore à ma sœur Laurence de vraiment tenir compte des peuples autochtones. Ce n'est pas parce que nous ne sommes pas allés à l'école que nous ne sommes pas capables de gérer les fonds. Il faut donner seulement à une personne de l'argent, lui demander d'investir et revenir voir combien à toute une communauté, à tout un groupe, une organisation que nous sommes vraiment capables de gérer. Et si vous travaillez directement avec ces communautés, vous aurez plus d'impact multiplié par X que si ça vient par des donateurs, ainsi de suite. Donc, il va falloir alléger vos systèmes, minimiser les intermédiaires et faire des financements directs aux communautés pour avoir des résultats concrets. Et peut-être d'ici l'échéance fixée, au lieu que la température monte, elle va plutôt chuter. Et vous aurez vraiment des résultats concrets et vous aurez amélioré les vies de ces communautés-là qui subissent de plein fouet les effets du changement climatique. Et merci au public, merci à nos amis qui sont en ligne aussi. Et merci à PUT qui a organisé cette activité et Alliance Globale qui est là. Merci à tous.
Just to pick up on that, I completely agree that as a donor community, we need to be working to reduce the administrative and financial and reporting burdens on these groups that are, really focused on outcomes, and we should be having outcome-based reporting. Thanks.
Muy buenas, muchas gracias más bien a todo el público que están aquí presente y agradecerles a nuestros panelistas, agradecerles aquí a mi lado, yo no me acuerdo el nombre, a la compañera principante que está aquí, que es un gusto de tenerlos, porque nosotros también como pueblos y nacionalidades de la región amazónica, que nos considere parte de ello, no ver aislado, y nosotros también queremos que haya más transparencia y participación en estos procesos, y también decirles en la Amazonía, nosotros estamos con muchos problemas de deforestación, contaminación. Creo que es oportuno estas reuniones. Ahorita ya estamos en emergencia ya sobrepasada. Creo que ya no más talleres, sino que queremos acción y la implementación inmediata, incluso remediación ambiental en los territorios que ya están contaminadas. Invitarles a que visite a Ecuador. Tenemos muchas amenazas que nos traen las empresas extractivistas. Recientemente tuvimos una resistencia reclamando nuestros derechos. Nuestros derechos han sido vulnerados, pero vamos a seguir exigiendo a los gobiernos a que nos respeten nuestra Amazonía, porque de ello vivimos y Y agradecerles una vez más a los intérpretes, a todos los panelistas que están aquí. Por primera vez estoy aquí, creo que es una bonita experiencia de compartir con ustedes lo poco que conozco, he compartido. Gracias.
Thank you. I think you've all wrapped it up so well. There's not much left for me to say except to again give a big thank you to our amazing panelists. Thank you so much for all of your contributions. I think we've heard of challenges, solutions, key perspectives, lots to work on from here onward. So thank you again for being with us. I also just want to thank our partners of the Forest Declaration Platform, some of which we have in the room, Meridian Institute, for example, who organized this event with us. So thank you again. Thank you to all of you for being here with us. And we hope you found it to be as productive and interesting as I did. Thank you. Yeah, we're going to sign it.